Marvel vs. Capcom, a name spoken in hushed tones throughout the fighting game community. Okay, maybe not so hushed, because there are a lot of fans of these games. A chance collaboration back in the 90s brought high-octane action and crazy combos to the arcades, and eventually home consoles, and the world has never been the same since. It's a shame that the series has been dormant ever since Infinite fell flat on its face 7 years ago, is what I would say, but a surprise compilation showing up out of nowhere earlier this year brought all the fans out of the woodworks, which has them hoping that maybe a true Marvel vs. Capcom 4 could actually happen now. But what could such a game be like? And how could the perfect roster win back a wary yet hopeful crowd? This isn't my usual area of expertise, but I want to capture what die-hard MVC fans like so much about these games. Maybe my outsider perspective will come up with ideas that the many other videos on this topic have overlooked. So without further ado, let me take you for a ride. But before that, a quick pit stop to introduce this video's sponsor, Marvel Strike Force. I know, how's that for relevant? Marvel's Strike Force is a free, mobile, squad-based RPG that lets you battle using your favorite Marvel heroes and villains to face off against forces of evil threatening the entire multiverse. Clear missions, power up your characters, and take on tougher challenges in PvP modes like Alliance War and Arena. Use my link down in the description, or scan the QR code on screen right now to download the game and unlock extra content completely for free. Marvel Strike Force features recruitable characters from across Marvel's entire lineup, including a lot of fan favorites, and it's easy to get into. You can unlock up to 17 characters within the first 30 days of playing, including big names like Spider-Man, Captain America, Thor, and Deadpool. The strategic potential here really caught my attention. Every squad member has a distinct role to play and unique abilities that can boost their teammates while taking down enemies. And the game's constantly updating with new faces from across the Marvel canon. Right now, the vampire hunter Blade and his team of Night Stalkers have joined the fight. This month is also introducing the brand new Battle World mode, where you fight alongside an alliance of friends to take on a world-spanning threat. Right now, players can redeem the code Halloween to obtain free stuff, 600,000 gold, 480 L2 training modules for leveling up your units, and 100 shards toward recruiting the Marvel Zombies version of Iron Man. If all of that interests you, check out the link down below or the QR code on screen and download Marvel Strike Force today. Thanks for the sponsorship, and now let's look at how a different Marvel crossover could be designed. First things first, what went into our mock-up roster? I settled on a size of 48 characters split down the middle, 28 veterans returning from past entries, and 20 newcomers. Might be unrealistically large for a starting roster nowadays, but hell, this series loves going for broke. Visually, the core combat returns in full form, a traditional fighter with 2D movement and 3D graphics. I give extra attention to the art style, especially after Infinite didn't. Stylized visuals are all the rage right now, so the game could lean into the aesthetics of modern comics, with rich color palettes and extra visual flair on everyone's attacks, along with some old-school dithering and other Silver Age art techniques for specific moves and alt costumes. Mechanically, the series' mainstays are also here. Select a whole team of characters to fight with, back up to 3 again because Dragon Ball FighterZ proved it can still be done. One character is active at a time normally, and the others can be tagged in or summoned to perform assist attacks. And we have a super meter you can build up to 5 stocks of and expend to use 3 levels of hyper combo super moves. Beyond that, I actually wouldn't introduce any brand new mechanics. I see this being a back to basics kind of game, rebuilding the series' foundations and polishing them until they shine. Nail the core stuff, fine-tune the roster balance so you don't have a small handful of characters dominating the meta like in past entries, and let the gameplay speak for itself just like it did in the arcades. And now, let's talk about the actual characters. We start with the most obvious place to start. There will be some difficult cuts, but the core 4 Avengers are here like always. As the story mode begins, Cap, Hulk, Thor, and Iron Man find themselves in a strange patchwork world that crudely fuses chunks of Earth, Asgard, and many other worlds together. A strange presence echoes in their minds, beckoning them to fight anyone else they find. But there are also fragments of Capcom worlds grafted in, including Metro City, pulling in a few Street Fighter characters, and one from Final Fight, since Hager is a former city mayor. Notably, Ryu and Chun-Li have their Street Fighter 6 designs, which plays into the plot, as being older and more traveled means they're quicker to realize something doesn't feel right about all this. Alongside them are a couple new faces. A new generation of MVC meets a new generation of Street Fighter. Luke Sullivan has grown on fans big time thanks to his role in Street Fighter 6 and his endearingly dorky personality. Amidst this weird mixed-up world, this soldier-turned-martial arts coach can still hold his own. Just like in Street Fighter, Luke would be straightforward and beginner-friendly in a different way than Ryu is. He sports an aggressive, footsies-based fighting style, with multiple moves that actively advance forward to pressure foes and open them up. He backs that up with specials like a quick but laggy blast of particle energy, a chargeable move that becomes one of multiple gap-closing punches, and a hyper combo where he tackles an opponent to the ground and punches their lights out. Room for one more? Since MVC's been in cryosleep for a while, it has some catching up to do. In this case, that means a fan favorite from Street Fighter 4 who has become a series mainstay. And oh boy, does Jury stick out next to the others. Always room for another more or less villain on the roster, right? Jury's violent nature comes out in an offense-heavy fighting style that's a natural fit for MVC, and her sadistic streak has her mix-in moves that stifle opponents like a fly caught in a spider's web. Her specials even have a unique quirk. Fuhajin is a rising kick that also builds up energy, which can enhance her other specials or be fired off as projectiles. Here's how the roster looks so far. Very basic, I know, but we have much more ground to cover. Don't touch that back button yet. Up next is another obvious pick. Peter Parker's perfect attendance record remains intact. His highly mobile web-slinging acrobatics work like they always have. But this roster comes with a twist, because for the first time, Peter isn't the only Spider-Man. Marvel's Miles Morales got his start in the comics when MVC was at its peak in 2011, yet he never made it in before the series went on hiatus. As, arguably, Marvel's most popular new character in the last 15 years, he's by far their most obvious choice for a newcomer. Miles plays the Ken to Peter's Ryu. They have some moves in common, but the ones that aren't make them play differently. Miles isn't as fast or strong, but he compensates with his own unique spider powers. He can camouflage himself to hide his movement for a couple seconds and use electrical venom blasts to stun foes in place. This makes him a more setup-heavy take on the Spidey archetype, with extra helpful assists. Oh, and someone followed them both here. One other way to win back the fans? Tap into characters who were planned for a previous game but got cut. Dr. Octopus was meant to be in MVC3 for long enough that he had unused graphics in an early build. That didn't come to pass in our timeline, but a new game could finally let another member of the Spidey's Rogues Gallery enter the fray. And it's not hard to see how. Those mechanical tentacles give Doc Ock unique mobility tools and a bunch of medium to long-ranged physical strikes. Could even pull a page from ARMS by letting him use 2 attacks at once, or grab people with them to be a half-grappler of sorts. Just don't let that power go to your head, or his slow frame data will get you punished. Returning next is the character with the company itself in her superhero name. Captain Marvel's the most archetypical hero here. Flight, super strength, super durability, star-powered energy attacks, the whole 9 yards. But tagging along is a different hero who started out as her biggest fan. Behold, the other obvious Marvel pickup. Ms. Marvel's had a surge in popularity, keeps making more appearances, and as such, a lot of fans are hoping she'd join MVC if it ever came back. Now, she can fight alongside, or against, her idol. Based mainly on her polymorphing power from the comics, Ms. Marvel can stretch and contort her body in impossible ways, most commonly by enlarging her arms to throw punches at crazy ranges and angles. Would stand out even from Doc Ock by being able to press extra directions mid-punch to curve them. But she can do even more, like flattening herself to duck under attacks, or a hyper combo where she grows giant and stomps on her opponent. You know, for something completely different. Back over to Capcom, where its other most famous franchise has a couple returners. Zero's an MVC mainstay now, so of course he's here. Who knows if the metagame can handle him this time. And the original Mega Man is back after sitting out ever since MVC2. With 3 new games since, and even more weapons to pull from, he reps a different side of the series than Zero does. Joining them both is someone from another timeline entirely. Turns out a lot of people are fond of Mega Man Battle Network based on how well its Legacy collection sold. The Battle Network Timeline's version of Base is here to appeal to them. A digital entity with a grudge against humanity, moving about in the shadows as the story progresses with his own agenda. As his series' recurring secret post-game boss, who is also plot relevant twice, Base has an arsenal of attacks for deleting anyone in his way. He can fire off energy bursts, summon dark razor blades, and even perform a diving punch that breaks a segment of ground and renders it unwalkable. He's on the frailer side, but only until he summons a dark aura with one of his hyper combos, temporarily protecting him from all damage under a certain threshold. Roster's starting to come together now. Don't rest for too long, because the fighters sure aren't. Not only are they dealing with each other, now they're also up against strange monochrome clones of themselves, like some kind of constructs. Now it's time to fix one of Infinite's biggest mistakes. The X-Men were a complete no-show last game due to some company feuds, but that's not a thing anymore. We'll start with Wolverine, Cyclops, and Storm, three of the most iconic mutants to grace this crossover. We also have the entire stable of X-Men available for newcomers, who could be an interesting... aha! How about one who's been on MVC fans' radars for a while? Nightcrawler hits that classic cliche of looks evil but is one of the good guys, and his mutant powers would give him plenty to stand out with, mostly revolving around his ability to teleport at will, letting him roll his eyes at any ridiculous attempts to zone him out. Could zip forward to approach in an instant, warp into the air to continue combos, and even teleport his opponent with him for his throws, all backed up by superhuman acrobatics and some very skilled fencing. Ever watch someone materialize a saber to attack with? How about passing it to his tail to swing it with that while keeping his hands free? Didn't think so. And we have room for another of the X-Men. I bet some of you watching are nodding your heads, while others are saying, who? Lucas Bishop hit his peak in the 1990s, but he's been active recently too, including the recent show written as a sequel to the 90s cartoon. He also has a vote of confidence from one of Capcom's directors, which at minimum means this time traveler from a dark future is on their radars. But Bishop's biggest upside is his ability to absorb and redirect energy. I picture him being a defensive zone breaker who can draw in energy-based projectiles by parrying them to power himself up. Then he could send the energy right back whenever he wants, or channel it into his laser rifle and other futuristic weapons to make them hit harder. Meanwhile, on the Capcom side, we have three very different veterans. Strider Hiryu's practically an MVC character, since his own series can barely get off the ground. Having him here just feels right. Captain Commando was an attempt at a company mascot that didn't last, but we can give him something to do for the first time since MVC 2. On the other end is the Devil Hunter who didn't show up until after Captain Commando left. Dante's using his Devil May Cry 5 design here. Like with Ryu and Chun-Li, being physically older than most of the cast helps him stand out. And joining him is... a series with high-octane action combat featuring stylish combos that require skilled execution. Am I talking about Devil May Cry or Marvel vs. Capcom? This time it's Dante's nephew Nero stepping up after his starring role in DMC5. Able to hold his own at medium and long ranges, Nero would wield his two most iconic weapons, the Blue Rose revolver and the Red Queen sword. The latter's got a special trick that would let him hold his heavy attacks to rev up the sword's built-in engine and infuse it with fire to extend its range. And he can mix in his Devil Breakers from DMC5 for specials with a wide variety of effects that break under certain circumstances, forcing him to equip new ones on the fly that change his abilities. What else needs to be here? Resident Evil's a big deal nowadays, and we can have our pick from the multiple RE characters that have been in past MVC games. I went with an iconic bad guy. Albert Wesker's been left waiting since MVC 3, and this gives the roster another villain. Also joining in is someone who finally made it. One of gaming's greatest mysteries? How this guy somehow didn't get in before now. Leon Kennedy is arguably the most popular Resident Evil character, yet he always got done in by timing or other factors. But thanks to a recent remake of his most famous outing, he's relevant again at, potentially, the perfect time. I could see his moveset leaning into the series' survival horror aspects. This would emphasize his training and resourcefulness to bait opponents into leaving themselves open so he can retaliate without burning through resources. He'd also have a counterattack grab for when foes get as predictable as the abominations he's used to fighting. And a level 3 hyper combo where he unloads an entire inventory's worth of weapons he's been hanging on to just in case he needed them. Alright, looking pretty good. As the story advances and more characters settle their differences, the more they're able to focus their attention on liberating everyone else. But who is left? Now for some more Marvel veterans. These guys had a following before, but their fan bases exploded thanks to major roles in the MCU. We might not be tethered to the movies like Infinite was, but we can keep them in mind. With that in mind, here are a couple newcomers who also became a big deal on the big screen. Wanda Maximoff, aka the Scarlet Witch, has been a mainstay in the comics, but her role in the MCU brought in a new wave of fans. MVC has had magic users before, but none have been wielders of something as unusual as chaos magic. An off-kilter zoner on paper, Wanda's specials wouldn't play by the usual rules. We're talking stuff like magic bolts that materialize at weird angles, or an orb that slowly homes in on targets but can be destroyed by enemy attacks. Chaos magic also lets her manipulate probability, which is where things get crazy. Marking someone with a hex could let her do stuff like make them spontaneously combust by simply pointing at them, or give their specials a random chance to not work. Always room for more martial arts in a fighting game? Shang-Chi's upsurge in relevance and fans, thanks to his recent film, give him a strong argument to get onto the roster, especially with his signature weapons. As a master of a kung fu style known as the Way of the Deadly Hand, Shang-Chi is a footsies-based fighter who opens foes up at mid-range and outmatches them blow for blow, which he does through use of the 10 rings. Magic artifacts he can cast off of his arms and control to do all sorts of things. He could send a ring forward as a projectile, expand one in front of him as a barrier, use multiple rings to encircle someone for a ranged command grab, and more. Meanwhile, Capcom has a different fighting game series that's been left for dead. Darkstalkers might still be 6 feet under, but Morrigan is 100% gonna show up if MVC ever rises from its grave. But Darkstalkers also likes to rotate newcomers, and this time, it's finally time for... Hey, look who isn't getting screwed over in a Capcom crossover for once. John Talbane always gets snubbed in these things, despite being one of the most popular Darkstalkers. Finally giving the werewolf martial artist a fair shot is another way a new MVC could throw fans a bone. Embodying his series' hyper-aggressive gameplay, Talbane has high mobility for rushing enemies down and strong attacks for overwhelming them. Held together by his signature Beast Cannon, a key-powered dash he can start from anywhere, aim in multiple directions, and even redirect halfway through. Add in the techniques he's picked up from the rigorous training that keeps himself in control of his powers, and you have a design that show why so many Capcom fans have wanted him here. From one wolf to another, and they're practically opposites. Talbane's powers have infernal origins, while Amaterasu is a sun goddess. She's also from a cult classic game and is one of the most unique fighters in MVC history, which helps make the roster even more compelling. But what if I told you there's room for another Capcom deity? Technically, he's a demigod, not that it matters much. Asura was on a lot of people's short lists for Infinite, yet despite being a new face with a fan following and legit moveset potential, he was a no-show. Being left waiting all this time has just made him angrier. A divine embodiment of wrath and vengeance, Asura would fight so relentlessly, it'd make even the Hulk tell him to cool off. And every setback would just make him stronger. Takes a big combo to the face, gets knocked down, has a teammate get defeated, all just make him more furious and more powerful. We can even give his hyper combos built-in quick-time events just like in his game. Nail the button prompts to make his foes really feel his wrath. We can't forget about Monster Hunter. Notably, this is not the same Hunter from Infinite. Instead, this one hails from the new game's Forbidden Lands, with a different aesthetic and a few moveset tweaks. Oh, and she brought someone along with her. You know how series fans have thought about a playable monster in MVC for a while, but the sheer size of most of them made it impractical? The new Bird Wyvern companion from Wilds gives us a workaround, a very unusual heavyweight from a series big enough now to justify 2 characters. Wait, you might be thinking, Sacrets don't actually participate in combat, and we can lean into that with a slapdash moveset of headbutts, claw swipes, tail whips, a mid-air glide, and occasionally one of the backup weapons strapped to their harness. But their support abilities would really stand out, including hard-hitting supers, drawing the aggro of bigger monsters and getting out of the way, and specials that are particularly useful as assists. This hunter's best friend is a great teammate. Most of the way there now. Is there anyone you're still hoping for? Maybe they're still stuck fighting and haven't been freed yet. Alright, we could use more villains. Marvel has a few in its veteran list. See, I did not forget about Magneto, who's more morally complicated, admittedly. Doom's also back to terrorize the meta faster than you can say, "Foot dive!" We can add another bad guy, right? How about one who's been a big deal lately? Loki, god of mischief, brother of Thor, perpetual Marvel villain, except none of those statements are completely true. Here he's playing the role of interloper with his own agenda, as he picks up that something strange is going on and tries to pull everyone else's strings to suit his own ends. Loki's moveset would be all about mind games. I know, big surprise. Imagine placing a magic trap on the ground and your opponent tries to jump over it, only to get hit anyway because the grounded magic was an illusion and it was actually floating in midair. Or how about a hyper combo that mesmerizes someone in his line of sight and compels them to move in whichever direction he chooses, including right into a spell he placed a moment prior. How amusing. And on the Capcom side, we have a couple regular dudes in over their heads. Part of MVC's appeal is how off the wall some of its picks get, and having a journalist and a lawyer going toe-to-toe with superheroes is part of the fun. It also shows off how deep Capcom's lineup is. You know a couple other deep cuts that'd be fun additions? Can't believe I'm saying this, but Capcom remembered that Power Stone exists. Included in the upcoming Fighting Collection 2, it means there's a chance its more or less main character could go on a whole new adventure if MVC comes back. You know how some fighting game characters start out weak but can transform and turn the tables? Edward Falcon would be able to obtain his game's eponymous Power Stones mid-fight. Once he has 3, he can expend meter to Power Change, gaining a suit of airplane-themed flying armor that enhances his entire moveset and has its own set of hyper combos. Dash into someone at Mach speed or unload a massive barrage of missiles that can bring down anyone. Once he gets going, he's a force to be reckoned with. Who here has heard of Sengoku Basara? Basically, it's an over-the-top action series where Capcom plays it fast and loose with Japanese history, like Dynasty/Samurai Warriors, but even less realistic. In other words, a perfect fit for MVC, and its first protagonist is the right man for the job. A very exaggerated version of the real person, Masamune Date takes the association with sword fighting and runs with it, with multi-sword attacks in a whole other league than the roster's other weapon users. And that's before he goes all out, with a hyper combo that activates his 6 claws mode, wielding 3 swords in each hand for overwhelming pressure, at the cost of not being able to block or parry at all until it's over. That's almost everyone, and if we want to talk about who's left, we need to get into how the game's story mode reaches its finale. The further things go, the more fighters band together as more of the map is liberated from the world-spanning conflict. Any true believers might have realized exactly what's going on. This is a retelling of the Secret Wars with Capcom thrown in, and this patchwork world is a battle world designed to pit everyone against each other. But now, they're overcoming those mental orders and taking the fight to the mastermind behind it all. Converging toward the center of the map, the heroes, villains, and everyone else storm the pristine tower located there, finding someone who was waiting for them to show up. Turns out the mastermind isn't evil so much as irresponsible. A cosmic entity from outside the multiverse, the Beyonder brought these characters and fragments of their worlds together because he was curious and wanted to see what would happen. Now that everyone's confronting him, he wants a piece of the action. Lowering his power levels to make it a fair fight, the Beyonder's ability to warp reality is still a force to be reckoned with. All of his moves, from simple hand-to-hand attacks, to forming matter out of black and white energy, to creating rifts to send attacks through, would have very casual-looking animations, like he's merely entertaining himself. Even if he gets quote-quote knocked out, he just smiles, rolls his eyes, and teleports away. It's his world, they're just playing in it. As the player's chosen team defeats the Beyonder, plus 2 copies of himself for a full team of 3, he falls to the ground defeated and just a little wounded. And that's where things go off the rails, as Base stops lurking around and springs into action, striking the being that forced him into the physical world with a pixelated explosion that actually incapacitates him. Activating the Battle Network Timeline's version of the variable weapons system, Base acquires the power of the boss he just defeated, copying the Beyonder's ability to bend reality, letting him disrupt all of existence. But then, he doubles over in pain as his body crackles with static. The virus fragments lying dormant in his code have sprung into action themselves, latching onto this new power, freeing themselves from Base, and forming a new body, a cosmic-level virus threatening to corrupt the entire multiverse. Cue final boss fight against the newly formed Gospel Beyond, a multi-phase ordeal that combines moves from Battle Network 2's final boss, multiple Base super boss encounters, and stolen reality-shaping powers wielded without the Beyonder's self-restraint. Yet by fighting their hardest, learning the boss's patterns, and probably trying multiple times, the combined forces of Marvel and Capcom prevail. Shaken from the experience, the Beyonder apologizes for everything he's put them through. Accepting his defeat gracefully, he allows everyone to return to their home worlds. Wait, isn't there one more character we're still missing? Originally written to subvert the edginess of comics in the 1990s, Squirrel Girl has all the powers of the eponymous animal, an upbeat attitude no matter the situation, and she gets a lot of mileage out of those things. Meet our roster's joke character, but not really. Squirrel Girl's moveset struggles to keep up in a straight fight, but if you know how to make the most of her quirks, she can be shockingly effective, like summoning one of her companions to latch onto an opponent and disrupt their attacks every few seconds, or a super based on her habit of somehow beating major villains off screen, where she rushes at her opponent and the screen cuts away to a serene landscape. That doesn't cover up the sounds of her beating the absolute snot out of them. How? Good question. That's, finally, everyone. A full roster of 48 Marvel and Capcom characters set to throw hands, including a bunch of classics, a few deep cuts, and a new class of newcomers ready to show what they're capable of. Had to make some difficult cuts to get here, though. Myself, I was hoping to keep Doctor Strange in, but it had to be done. If some of your favorites didn't make it, then hey, there's always DLC. I could see a first wave looking like this, with 3 apiece from Marvel and Capcom and a 50-50 split of newcomers and returning veterans. Okay, here's a second wave too, and there are still some big names missing. But how about you? What would your take on a new Marvel vs. Capcom roster look like? Any characters you'd want to be there? And ideas for how they'd fight? Leave a comment if you feel inspired. I'm interested to hear more ideas. And if you're new to the channel, check out the other roster videos I've already made this year. Some interesting stuff. Promise. For now, special thanks to the following for helping make this video happen. Special shout out to my patrons for the continued support. And now, it's time for them to assemble. Anyone currently backing me on Patreon for as little as $1 per month can vote on which of these options gets a roster video next. Who will claim victory this time? So, until next time, sorry, no post-credits stinger here.